Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. Happy Peer Review Week, and welcome to today's Council of Science Editors webinar, The Peer Review Ecosystem, Where Does Diversity and Inclusion Fit In? Today's webinar is sponsored by Technica Editorial Services, and we're very pleased that you're able to join us. My name is Brittany Sweat, and I will be facilitating today's event. Before we get started, I have a few quick housekeeping items to review. First, as an attendee on today's webinar, you will be muted. As your questions arise during the event, please use the question function to send in your questions. We will keep track of these and address them at the end of the webinar. If we are not able to get to your question, we will keep track of it and reply to you offline following the conclusion of the event. At the conclusion of the webinar, you will receive an email with a link to complete an evaluation. Please take a few minutes to provide your feedback, as it is invaluable to our education committee when planning future webinars. If you are a CSC Publication Certificate Program participant, you are required to complete the evaluation. Also, in the email you receive, you will be sent PDF copies of our presenter slides from today's webinar. In the spirit of Peer Review Week 2018, today's webinar will cover topics related to diversity and inclusion in peer review. This slide discusses some of the high-level topics we will be talking about. Diversity and inclusion in peer review is a complex issue that requires multidimensional approaches to creating progress in this area within scholarly publishing, and I look forward to hearing the perspectives of today's presenters, who it is now my pleasure to introduce. Our speakers today, in the order of presentation, are Raquel Jemison, Scholars Program Manager from the American Chemical Society, Brooks Hansen, Executive Vice President of Science at the American Geophysical Union, Ella Fleming, Journal Development Manager at BMC Springer Nature, Monica Rivera-Ment, Professor of Psychology and Latin American Latino Studies at Fordham University, as well as Department Editor for the Culture and Gender Department of the Clinical Neuropsychologist Journal. Now, as we begin, I'd like to pass it over to Raquel, our first speaker.
Hello, everyone. We're just going to get a bit of a transition so that you can see my slides. Okay, you should be able to see my slides at this point. Again, my name is Raquel Jemison, and I am the Program Manager for the ACS Scholars Program here in the Education Division. I would like to share with you in a few short minutes our approach as an organization to diversity and inclusion. ACS has been engaged in identifying ways to close various representation gaps since the 1960s, with even more dedicated efforts since the 1990s. So today I'll be sharing some of the ways that we create an environment that encourages diversity and inclusion at all levels of the organization. First of all, the American Chemical Society, if you're not aware, is an organization that was founded via congressional charter in 1876. We are a non-for-profit 501c3 scientific society with about 150,000 members worldwide. In addition to the arms of ACS that you may be familiar with, such as publications, which includes Chemical and Engineering News, and the Chemical Abstract Services, there are also a number of society programs, and the two that I'll be talking about today include the Education Division and the two programs that we have that specifically address diversity, as well as the Membership Division and how we engage at the membership level in terms of making a more inclusive environment. Meaningful diversity and inclusion initiatives start at the core of your organization. So here you'll see our vision, our mission, and also our values. We want to improve people's lives through the transforming power of chemistry, and we do that by advancing the chemistry enterprise and its practitioners for the benefit of Earth and its people. Our values include a passion for chemistry, a focus on our members, professionalism, safety, and ethics, and of course, diversity and inclusion. And so my next few slides will outline how we put this into practice. So starting with the Education Division, I want to first speak about Project C. This is one of our oldest programs that's rooted in specifically increasing diversity and inclusion. It was founded in 1968, so this year is our 50th anniversary, and is a program where we have paid summer research experiences for low-income high school students at partnering universities, government labs, or industry labs across the U.S. So every summer we have about 400 students that participate across the domestic U.S. and several U.S. territories as well, including Puerto Rico. And there are over 350 institutions participating. Over the lifetime of the program, we've had 10,000 students participate. And at this point, we've also been offering scholarship opportunities for eligible students. So those that are pursuing chemistry-related majors have the opportunity to apply for a scholarship program. There's more information that you can find about Project Seed on our website, but one of the ways that this helps to engage our members is that it gives them an opportunity to invite students of lower income backgrounds into their labs for actual hands-on experiences. They're not just washing dishes in the lab, they have meaningful hands-on lab experience. Again, this also engages our current membership and our colleagues in the chemical field to recognize and support the value of inclusion. The next program that I want to discuss briefly is the ACS Scholars Program. This was founded in 1995 out of the Committee of Minority Affairs, which I'll go into more in the following slide. It's a renewable scholarship, excuse me, it's a renewable scholarship program for undergraduate students of underrepresented races majoring in chemistry-related fields. And specifically, what we refer to in terms of underrepresented minority race backgrounds are Hispanic, Latino, African American, and Native American students. And this was identified by NIH in their study back in the early 1990s, identifying these specific racial groups as drastically underrepresented in the chemical sciences. Each year, somewhere between 350 and 400 students attending over 200 different colleges and universities across the U.S. and its territories not only receive over $1 million in scholarship checks, but they also receive mentorship, opportunities to meet and network with donors, and also abilities to take advantage of travel awards to ACS national meetings. Again, the website, you can find more information about that at the bottom, acs.org/scholars. So as I mentioned, one of the programs, ACS Scholars, was kind of the brainchild of the Committee of Minority Affairs. And that organization has a bit of a backstory. So in 1991, the then president of ACS, S. Alan Heininger, appointed a task force on minorities in the chemical sciences. And this task force pulled together a few recommendations on how ACS could contribute in changing the face of chemistry. The force recommended several changes, including the establishment of the Committee of Minority Affairs back in 1993, which is still an operating committee, and also the establishment of the Minority Scholarship Program, which has since changed its name to the ACS Scholars Program. The ACS Diversity Programs Office was then created to support the Committee of Minority Affairs in this effort. So since then, a number of additional committees have either migrated into the Department of Diversity Programs portfolio or have been created since then. And so you'll see a list of the various committees that currently exist, such as the Committee of Minority Affairs, which I mentioned, the Committee on Chemists with Disabilities, the Younger Chemists Committee, Women Chemists Committee, and so on and so forth. The Department of Diversity Programs is also responsible for keeping track of and reporting diversity and inclusion data on ACS staff and membership. They serve as a resource for staff and committees when it comes to best practices and also establishing relationships with minority advocacy organization. And these include organizations such as ACES, the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, SACNIS, the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science, NOGLSTOP, the National Organization of Gay and Lesbian Scientists and Technical Professionals, and also NOBUCHE, the National Organization for the Professional Advancement of Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers. And so this organization, or I should say this office, the Department of Diversity Programs, works a lot in establishing very close relationships with these organizations, whether it's a memorandum of understanding where there's mutual benefits for both organizations, or it can just be a matter of consistent presence at each of their annual conferences. So some additional things that the diversity committees offer. These are just additional ways that we can ensure that we have great representation in an environment of inclusion across our membership and also in our national meetings. So included in those are travel awards for those of underrepresented groups to attend ACS national meetings. And we also have what I call cross-pollination activities, where we invite award-winning poster presentation students from these minority advocacy conferences to attend an ACS national meeting on our dime. There are a number of scholarships that are offered from the various committees, planned events, seminars, and workshops during national and regional meetings. Of course, ongoing activities and various campaigns, but one very meaningful way that we do try to incorporate and ensure that we have diversity and inclusion, even at our awards and recognition level, is by ensuring that there are opportunities for underrepresented groups to nominate their own candidates for these awards. So for example, the ACS Award for Encouraging Disadvantaged Students into Careers in the Chemical Sciences. This is actually an award where Project Seed Committee selects a either former mentor or coordinator for the program for a Chem Luminary Award, and that is one of our highest awards that can be offered within the American Chemical Society. The Stan C. Israel Regional Award for Advancing Diversity in the Chemical Sciences is an award that any region can bestow to a professional in the chemical industry or in academia, what have you, for recognizing their efforts in improving diversity in their community or wherever their realm of reach may be. So as you can see, ACS has a number of different venues through which we try to reinforce the importance of inclusion and diversity. And it takes that culture, I think, incorporating that into the very values of ACS that makes the difference. Again, if there are any questions, you can reach out to me. I have my email address here. And if you'd like to reach out directly to the manager of the Department of Diversity Programs, you can reach out to Benjamin Fiore Walker. So if you have any questions, please do feel free to ask. Thank you. Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Brooks Hansen.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully you all can hear me now and see my screen. So I'm going to follow up and talk about mostly some research that the American Geophysical Union has been doing on implicit bias in scholarly publishing and meeting presentations. We've done this in partnership with some other groups, and this isn't, so this is work I've done or that we've done, and particularly with Jory Lurbach, who worked at AGU for a bit a couple of years ago and is now at the University of Utah. So let me just start off. We're mostly going to be talking about implicit bias related to gender. This is because we have data for, we and many other organizations have data on gender, but we should expect that this is representative of implicit bias related to other minority groups and ethnic groups as well. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so just a reminder that we should, implicit bias that should actually be expected and not expected. So there's been a long history of research on implicit bias, particularly gender bias, and just a quick summary of it. There's been a long test handed to very early grade school students called the Draw a Scientist test. And for a long time, these were only, a large number of kids were basically all drawing scientists as men, with a few exceptions. There's been a recent update of this. This has been going back decades. There's been a recent update of this in some recent study where women started drawing women scientists more, but men still invariably drew scientists as men. So these are kids, and you might say, well, those are kids and they mature, but when they're adults. But there have been other studies of, and this is a large study of 170,000 undergraduate majors in a whole variety of disciplines. And it's a little complicated here, but the y-axis is essentially an implicit bias index. And you can see that as particularly in the hard sciences, the implicit bias increases for men and decreases for women. So again, these are undergraduate, soon-to-be graduate students in well, in a whole bunch of disciplines, but in the sciences. So again, this is something we should expect. And so the way we've been analyzing it, we've been able to match our AGU member database, where both age and gender are self-reported, and they're self-reported to a very high degree, and from tests we've done, very accurately, with both our editorial database and our meetings database. So this result applies mostly to members, though we have a lot of age and gender information from non-members, and particularly that age data are important because in the Earth and Space Sciences, where AGU is, but also in most other sciences, there's a large demographic trend where women have participated only recently. So one needs to separate or have age data to separate actual implicit bias or evidence of bias from age-related trends. And so we're talking about on the publishing, AGU is one of the largest Earth and Space Science publishers. We publish about 7,000 papers a year. So over 3 or 4 years, we can look at, we get, ends of on the order of 100,000 for looking at peer reviewers, or several tens of thousands for looking at authors. The AGU meeting is one of the largest scientific meetings in the world. We have about 25,000 abstracts each year. Each of those has 4 to 5 co-authors. So very quickly, looking over several years, we get, for example, I'm going to show some author collaboration data. We easily get data into the 500,000 or 600,000 individual interactions. So in this paper that Jory Lurbeck led and was published in Nature at the early last year, one of the things we found was that the acceptance rates of first authors, and in the Earth and Space Sciences, the first author is usually the lead author, not the last author. We found that the acceptance rate for women was actually significantly higher than men, regardless of the age. And also regardless of the international distribution on the manuscript, or regardless of the number of authors, how big the author group was. And this was pretty anomalous. Most other studies have found either no difference in acceptance rate between papers by men or women as lead, or there's a recent paper, for example, that just came out looking at the eLife data set since eLife started, that was in bioRxiv. It's now posted on bioRxiv, that found that, again, looking at last authors, because most of the papers are in biology in eLife, and the last author is really the significant lead author in the tradition or culture of biology papers, found that women were accepted at a lower rate. So our result is a little anomalous. There's a couple possible ways you can interpret that. You could say that women in the Earth and Space Sciences are just smarter. You could say that there's other evidence that groups that feel disadvantaged work harder, are more careful, or take less risks. So there's a variety of ways that one could interpret that. But it's an interesting result. We also found, despite the broader acceptance as authors, that women participated significantly less than men as reviewers. So this, let's see. sorry about that. So that this is by age, the percent reviewers, and what's shown in these bars is what we might expect for each age cohort based on the membership rate or the in AGU or the acceptance rate of first authors or all authors on papers, because usually your reviewer pool would come from your author pool. And then we found, regardless of age, that women participated less as reviewers. And so there's likely several reasons for this. And we did some tests to try to understand what these were and what the effects were. So one of the possible reasons is that women are being suggested less to begin with by authors, both men and women, and that gets back to the implicit bias research. So what we did is we did an experiment with our largest journal where we specifically pointed out our study and reminded people essentially of a potential bias and asked them to include a broader representation of reviewers. And this worked. So this is before publications in all journals except GRL. During the test period, we saw no difference. But actually in GRL, so the before and after, we saw a significant increase in the number of women suggested by male authors when they're starting a review. We provided the same notice to our editors. So typically, an editor might use one or so of the author suggestions as reviewers, but then provide their own suggestions. And so we provided the same reminder to the editors. And so we declared victory after we were going to run this for 6 months, but after 3 months, the results were quite clear, and we applied it across all our journals and in 2017. And this is the data for 2018, and you can still see a significant increase across all our journals in this participation, including now from women as well. So the number of women suggested as reviewers, and hopefully both younger scientists and other demographics were also increased as reviewer suggestions. In addition, the reviewer decline rate as a result of our study, or we think as a result of our study, also decreased. So this is after we published our study in 2017. Women declined a lot less to review, and this year we've had a lot less of decline. So part of we think part of discussing these issues and being transparent has helped kind of raise the understanding of how important it is to review, and one might say we might be getting better suggestions for reviewers. So over time, we have seen women that, the participation of, so this is percent women on the y-axis again, that are participating as reviewers, both from suggestions by authors and invitations by editors, has increased over time. So we feel that these effects are making a difference. And notice that our male editors are kind of adding to the suggestions by male authors and helping as well. So then there's another question raised by this, is why what is there something else behind the differences between men and women here, and who they're suggesting as reviewers and why they're suggesting as reviewers? So before I get into that, we've also, this is a collaboration with AGU. Corinne runs our data at AGU, and a group in Cambridge led by Heather Ford, looking at speaking opportunities in the AGU fall meeting. So this was using our meetings database, but again, merged with our membership database unblinded. And again, saw an implicit bias where invited abstracts and oral presentations from male session conveners were offered to women less than for women session conveners. And this is the data. Sorry, the colors are different, but for female conveners are in the light green versus gray. And there's another kind of, this isn't the same decadal age range, but another proxy for age. And again, you can see that there's a significant difference in participation or invitations for invited speakers. So we're trying to understand these difference between men and women. Is it simply that one is a man and one is a woman, or is there some other effect on that's producing this? And so we looked at again, using our meetings data over several years, where we have essentially many hundreds of thousands of individual co-author interactions. So basically the authorship network for our participants in our meeting, broken down by age and gender. So it's a little complicated graph. Let me try to explain it if we focus up on this one. So this is for an author or a researcher in their 20s, who they are interacting with. And so again, there's the proportion of women here. And so we actually have high school students present at our meeting as well. So the red bar are women. So a women author in their 20s interacts on average with other authors in their 20s to the extent that 45% of those interactions of other authors in their 20s are women, and about 38% are men. And that those 20-year-old researchers, if they're a man, or they will interact with a distribution of authors that are about 29% male, and if they're a woman in their 20s, they interact with other scientists, other co-authors in their 30s at about 35%. And the horizontal bars here are what we would expect from our membership if this researcher and their 20-year-olds was simply interacting with their membership at random. And so what this shows is that women pretty much interact with other co-authors, regardless of age, at about the rate expected, or about the ratio, gender ratio expected from the membership. And men, both in their 20s, but this extends across all other age cohorts as well, interact with co-authors that are predominantly male. And so the concern here is that these co-author network biases, and I'm using bias here in a just purely statistical sense, or difference, are baked in very early. And the importance is that when you form co-authors early in your career with other people early in your career, so they often extend throughout your career. So we think these essentially interaction networks can partly explain the differences that we're seeing. And the worry is, or the concern is that they seem to be baked in very early in your career, and they seem to be still baked in. So if we want to address this implicit bias, we should start thinking about expanding networks, or homogenizing networks, or expanding networks for young scientists. We've done the same thing with publications. There is an interesting, the N here is less because there's the difference between 7,000 papers a year versus 25,000 abstracts a year. It is a little encouraging that we're seeing in publications a little more evenness for the youngest set of authors, but broadly the same patterns emerge. So in conclusion, implicit bias is widespread in the peer review process. Women behave differently as authors, or including a woman will help your paper succeed. Might be one conclusion from our data. Explicit reminders of bias help eliminate those bias. Having women session conveners and editors makes a difference in participation and expanding participation. And a reminder that this, we've studied gender, but the same result I'm sure applies to other demographic groups. One likely reason is that peer networks are different. Male networks are biased towards other males, even among student early career researchers. So women have balanced networks by age. This bias is still being baked in, which will make it a continuing challenging in the future. Or, if you want to simplify it, it's young boy networks become old boy networks. Just related, AGU, so I focus most on that. In addition, AGU has not just been studying implicit bias. We've been working much more broadly on ethics and equity, and we've just launched an Ethics and Equity Center, which is just starting, but we'll have a wide range of resources. It's in partnership with a few other groups, and we'll have a wide range of resources on ethics, diversity, and equity, and present some leading practices. We're working on extending this to train both editors and section conveners, and across AGU we've kind of used the lessons from this also in how we construct committees in our honors and award process, and wide variety across the organization. It's very similar to what you just heard from ACS. But many of the resources and work are here, and please visit this site and ask us some broader questions. AGU was one of the societies taking the lead in calling harassment and bullying scientific misconduct, and some further information on that is here as well. And I think we're going to share the PDF, so I just have some references here. Thank you. And now I'm going to pass the presentation on to Ella. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Brooks. I hope you can all see my screen now. So I'm going to be talking a bit about increasing diversity in peer review from a publisher's perspective. I'm a journal development manager working at BMC, which is part of the publisher Springer Nature. But I think it's worth just thinking about why discussing diversity is important, particularly for reviewer pools. So first off, there's a moral ground for ensuring equal opportunities across research fields, and that's across the whole of the research field. So, for example, research grants, PI positions, or as peer reviewers. The second is that everyone comes with their own unconscious biases, and by ensuring diversity, you create environments where these can be challenged. So diversity in any workplace brings different perspectives and values and experiences, and these ultimately can result in more productive and successful environments. The third reason why diversity is important is because article output is growing faster than reviewer pools. It's currently predicted that about 10% of reviewers are responsible for about 50% of the peer review record. And as article output continues to grow, which it's doing year on year, this just isn't sustainable. So we need to ensure that reviewer pools are matching author pools across different fields. When it comes to diversity in reviewer pools, we're mainly considering aspects such as gender. There's also geographical distribution, lower middle income countries. We're also talking about stakeholders that can include patients or members of the public. There's also career stage, so early career researchers, mid-career researchers, and senior researchers. We're also talking about ethnicity, but then there are other types as well, so institutions and affiliations, sexual preferences. There's lots of different areas to diversity. So the first example that I'm going to discuss is around involving early career research in peer review. So it's well known that early career researchers are much less visible from their publication record than their more senior counterparts, and they don't have that wide publication record that makes them easily sort of visible and findable for editors. We do hear quite often that early career researchers are involved in peer review, but this is happening behind the scenes, and these early career researchers aren't getting the credit for it, they're not getting acknowledged. From a journal's perspective as well, we're seeing more ad hoc requests from reviewers who say that they can only accept if they can work with someone from their department or one of their early career researchers within their labs. So within BMC, we wanted to formalise a process for peer review mentoring of early career researchers. We wanted to make it transparent and also to ensure that the expectations are really clear, and that's both for the mentor and for the mentee. But overall, we wanted to ensure that we were maintaining the integrity of the peer review process. So in June earlier this year, we announced that 4 journals at BMC were launching proactive endorsement of peer review mentoring.
So this encourages more senior researchers to train and guide early career researchers to participate in peer review. So you can see on the screen at the moment the workflow for this. So it's relatively simple. So a senior researcher would be invited to peer review, and if they had an early career researcher within their department or lab that they wanted to mentor that had the relevant expertise, they could decline this invitation and suggest the mentee instead. The editor would then invite the mentee, and together the mentee, under the guidance of the mentor, would complete the review, and it would be the mentee who submits the report to the journal. So all of the journals in this initiative are open peer review journals, and we've developed a way for both the mentor and the mentee to transparently co-sign the review reports. This is both through questions within our editorial system, and also by instructions of what should be included within the main body of the review report as well. So reviewers or readers can find more information about this on the journal homepages, the about pages, and also full information is linked to from the reviewer invitation email. But I think it's worth considering why would reviewers want to be involved in peer review mentoring. There's multiple reasons which are listed on this slide. So first up, we have that it's key for the development of the next generation of researchers, particularly in their critical appraisal skills. As I mentioned, these journals in this initiative are all open peer review journals, and this means that they, if an article is accepted that they review, then the review reports are published alongside the article. And this is particularly important for early career researchers because it means that they can cite these early, they can cite these reports for their own personal development before they, for example, have a detailed or extensive publication record. The journals will also provide reviewer certificates and confirmation of review on branded letterheads. So again, this can be for personal or professional development. These journals also publicly post annual reviewer acknowledgement lists on their websites and send thank you emails to their reviewers. And within the guidance on peer review mentoring, we also have lots of training resources which are particularly important for early career researchers. So here on the slide, you can see to the left an example of the page from the journal Trials, which is taking part in this initiative. And the bottom box, you can see useful training resources for peer review. So far, we've had a few reviewers opting into the mentoring initiative and co-signing the reports, and the feedback that we've received so far has been really, really good. You can see some quotes on the slide here from one of the first mentors who took part in the initiative. So this feedback highlights that this has been a welcome scheme and that the instructions that we have are clear and easy to follow. We will continue to compile feedback as more mentors and mentees take part in the initiative, and we also have plans to look at the reports and see what the difference is between a menteed report and a non-menteed report. I think this is one of the sort of big areas for development within journals. I think peer review mentoring is really sort of coming to the forefront at the moment. Some other journals as well have started creating infrastructures for it too. So F1000 has a way of co-reviewing reports, so that can also support mentee-mentor setups. The second example I want to highlight is around involving stakeholders in peer review. So I think first things first, what do we mean by stakeholders? So these can be patients, they can be members of the public, carers or policymakers. Essentially, they are any person who might benefit from the research that's being published. Stakeholder itself adds a really important and often fresh perspective on a piece of research. In particular, it can help focus on the accessibility of a paper to a wider audience and highlighting relevance of research findings. And this bigger picture aspect can often be lost, but will be vital for ensuring that research benefits the people who it's intended to benefit. So there are a couple of journals that have begun building infrastructures for stakeholder or patient peer review. So most notably, we have Cochrane and the Cochrane Consumers Network. We have the BMJ that has a patient and public partnership. And within BMC, we have a co-produced journal called Research Involvement and Engagement. All of these examples here include patient peer review as part of their processes, and I'm now going to go into a bit more detail on research involvement and engagement. So this journal is the first and internationally co-produced journal on patient involvement and engagement in research. And by co-produce, what we mean is that academics and patients have equal weight in the direction of the journal. The journal is overseen by co-editors-in-chief Sophie Staniszewska, who is our academic editor from the University of Warwick. And we also have Richard Stevens, who's our patient editor, who's from the UK. All manuscripts are overseen by a joint pairing of academic and patient co-editors, and they make joint decisions together on these manuscripts. All of the articles in the journal are also peer reviewed by both academics and by patients, and the editorial board itself is made up of all key stakeholders for this field, so that's academics and patients, carers, policymakers. I think what's also really important about having a journal set up like this is that it is freely available to anyone who wants to read it. So this is an open access journal, so all articles are available to academics or patients, and we also include plain language summaries with all articles, particularly for the patients that might want to understand the research published. So you can see on the screen now a schematic of how the manuscript workflow works within the journal. So at the top here you have the manuscript is submitted, which is the same as every other journal. But once you get to the stages where you have the editors, so these are the green boxes, these are all co-editor decisions. This is an academic and patient editor working on the manuscript together and making joint decisions. So that happens at multiple stages through the workflow. We also have, when it comes to peer review, the manuscript is sent to a minimum of 2 academic reviewers, as you would in a normal journal, but also 2 patient reviewers. And when we say patient reviewers, we also mean carers and laypersons. So patient review in journals is another area that's currently that currently has a lot going on in terms of development. So research involvement and engagement and the BMJ recently published a survey that looked at patient reviewers' motivations and experiences from these 2 journals. And the kind of aim for this was to help us develop guidance and a better infrastructure. So after the survey results were published, both journals have updated their reviewer guidelines, and on the screen now you can see the example from research involvement and engagement. Research involvement and engagement has also recently published an editorial. So this was published on yesterday, detailing its short and longer term plans in the area. And as I've mentioned, the long-term goal here is to develop a kind of common framework for academic journals that want to include patient review or any type of stakeholder review. And next steps for this kind of journey are actually happening next week at the Cochrane Colloquium, where we have a workshop that has been co-hosted by Research Involvement and Engagement, Cochrane and the BMJ, where we hope to begin developing a way to learn from each other and embed best practice. So increasing diversity and inclusivity in academic journals is currently a huge area for development. And on the slide, you can see some of the key areas for development. So first, we have measuring diversity. There's a lot more going on now and more discussions around how we can collect data on diversity and how we can start benchmarking this across disciplines. There's also editorial board management, so there's increased awareness of sort of unconscious biases and lack of diversity. So these are being, these are really being, well, they're increasingly being addressed in reviewer invitations, in editor and board recruitment, and also in commissioning articles. We also have developments in supporting reviewer diversity. So this incorporates both developing infrastructures and processes to help expand reviewer pools, but also as we're expanding the reviewer pools, also ensuring that there's training, recognition and incentives for reviewers. And I think what's quite key is that we do need to be advocating for increased diversity across the whole spectrum of research. It's not just within peer review, but as you've heard from the previous speakers, we're also talking about society members and all the things that go on across the whole variety of research. Within BMC, we actually held an editors conference earlier this year with a theme of diversity within journals, and we now have projects that might help address some of the disparities that we see within our journals. So to finish up with some concluding remarks, there was some recent research published by Publons that highlighted that 75% of editors are saying that securing reviewers is the most difficult part of the editor role. So this is obviously a high priority area that needs to be addressed. Currently, reviewer pools aren't matching author pools, but peer review is changing to help address some of the pressures it's facing. We need to diversify and increase inclusivity of peer review to ensure that we're meeting the needs of the communities. And there's quite a few initiatives happening in different areas here. So this includes gender, also geographical diversity. We've mentioned career stage and we've mentioned stakeholders. I think what's key for supporting the change in this area is changing mindsets around issues of diversity and inclusivity across the whole of the research spectrum, as I've mentioned, as well as ensuring that we're developing infrastructures and processes within journals to proactively increase reviewer pools to help match author pools. And as publishers, we want to develop to meet the needs of the research community. So if you have feedback or you have ideas, please do reach out. Okay, thank you very much. And once there are also some main references included here, which will be included in the PDF once this has been circulated. Okay, I'm now going to pass over to Monica.
Thank you very much, Ella, and thank you everybody for joining us today. It's a privilege to be here. I'm so pleased to be part of this really interesting discussion on peer review and diversification. And I'm proud to be representing my journal, The Clinical Neuropsychologist, and discussing our approach to increasing diversity and inclusion within our journal. So as mentioned earlier, I'm the editor of TCN's Culture and Gender in Neuropsychology department. For those of you not familiar with our field, we are neuropsychology is essentially the integration of neuroscience and psychology, and we're focused on brain behavior relationships. And I'm really going to tell you a story during my time today about our journal's journey towards greater diversity and inclusion. So first, some background on this. So what do we know? So we know that women and underrepresented minority groups such as African Americans and Latinx and others are underrepresented and insufficiently studied in research. We also know from the perspective of wanting to help people with brain disorders and other neurologic issues that there remains little guidance or standards on evidence-based practice for working with underrepresented minority patients and women. In fact, if we go further in thinking about science and its interface with working with populations that we're interested in, we know that women and underrepresented minority individuals are also underrepresented in the scientific and academic forums that have been discussed today, such as authorship, editorial and organizational leadership positions, and also if we go more broadly into scientific review panels and beyond. However, there is a disconnect because while there continues to be underrepresentation in these different areas, we also know that in the United States, for instance, the demographics of the country are changing and becoming more diverse. So what is TCN going to do about this, and what is our stake in the game? So first, let me tell you that our journal is deeply committed to advancing diversity and inclusion within neuropsychological science, and moreover, advancing empirically based practice with women, with underrepresented minorities, and in all underrepresented groups in terms of disseminating cutting edge research to inform guidelines and policy as well. So what steps has our journal taken to advance diversity and inclusion? Well, here on this slide, I have essentially the three pillars of what we're focusing at this time. So our first goal is to cultivate a diverse editorial board of leading scholars to guide the field, of course, in this area. Second, to facilitate submissions of manuscripts focused on diversity and inclusion in order to inform practice and inform policy and improve care, of course. And finally, to ensure high quality reviews of these manuscripts, and of course, all manuscripts. In terms of TCN's strategic initiatives in this area, I'll share some of the work accomplished thus far. So first, between 2015 to today, TCN has taken an active step in diversifying our editorial board. And first, I want to note that the number of women as editors on our editorial board has essentially doubled during this short time frame. And second, that the number of racially and ethnically diverse members on the board has also grown significantly, as you'll see here, from 2% to 13%, which is large. And I also want to highlight that much of this focus, this vision, and these strategic changes that I'm sharing with you today have to do with the incredible leadership of our editor-in-chief, Dr. Yana Suki, who is at the University of Utah, who has been instrumental in really facilitating these changes that I'm talking about and having the vision for us to go forward. So during Dr. Suki's tenure, we've seen the significant growth in the diversity of the editorial board. And another really innovative step that Dr. Suki has taken in this editorial role is to launch the Culture and Gender and Neuropsychology department within TCN, within the journal. And to our knowledge, this is the first editorial department of its kind dedicated to actively integrating the roles of culture and gender in neuropsychological science and in editorial leadership. So this is really exciting. So this is a new department, and I'm now going to share with you some of what our vision and what we're doing within this department. So first, our mission, as you see here, is the advancement of science, empirically based practice, editorial leadership, professional development, and open scientific dialogue as they relate to culture and gender. In terms of our approach, we really see our approach as essentially disruptive. We cannot rely on business as usual approach, and are really focused on calling attention to and really disrupting the automatic processes that concern women and underrepresented minority individuals in research and the editorial process. And my colleagues have already done a great job of talking about some of this today, my co-presenters, such as talking about implicit bias, and other things that we're talking about it within our department and looking at are things like microaggressions and privilege that can impact participants in research studies, patients in care, students, trainees, and the field as a whole. So with this the somewhat disruptive approach, we are also focused on taking a multifaceted survey and approach to our journal to see how we can address current challenges in the field that I've already described to you. So we have 6 core areas that we're focusing on in our department, the Culture and Gender and Neuropsychology department, and they're essentially focused on providing resources to our reviewers and to the field, and as well as leadership to help inspire the field as a whole to move forward in this area. So one area that we're focusing on is cultivating and curating special issues within our journal to address culture and gender in neuropsychology. We've had our first special issue come out earlier this year that we're very proud of. My co-editor in this department, who is Dr. Hilzebeck, was the special issue editor, and it focused solely on gender and career advancement in clinical neuropsychology. And it's been very well received, and I've actually heard from other guild organizations in our field that it's helped inform some of their work and some new awards that they're putting together to focus on gender in their own guild organizations. So I see that as a real positive. In terms of an upcoming special issue, as an exemplar to you, we're currently working on a special issue on cultural neuropsychology and providing normative data for neuropsychological tests in our field. And I will be editing this issue, and that is forthcoming. So that's one area. A second area that we are focused on is editorial. So we will, throughout the year, be contributing and soliciting editorials on germane topics within our area to highlight and feature within the TCN journal. And we're currently working on one right now, and in a highly relevant area on privilege. Third, we are dedicated to providing resources for authors. So TCN is currently working on establishing a new TCN publication guidelines as a resource for authors that will help them to identify the fundamental demographic and cultural information that should be included in each manuscript within that's submitted to TCN. And we hope that this will actually facilitate the manuscript review process and increase efficiency, but also highlight to researchers the important issues that they should be thinking about as they design their studies and think about how they're going to disseminate their work. Also, we are developing training materials and also plan to provide updates in these areas for the website for authors for their resources and benefit. Now, on this next slide, you'll see our final three goals and activities that our department is working on. The fourth one is providing resources for the TCN editorial board and for our reviewers. So in this role, we're serving as resources for questions and to provide consultations to the editors and to reviewers and even authors if needed regarding areas where they might have questions about culture and gender and how to review manuscripts, maybe identifying reviewers, all kinds of things. So this is a little bit of a hodgepodge right now, but we're providing the service to those in our journal who are interested. The fifth issue is leading new initiatives. So right now we are working with TCN to develop methods to track and document TCN's efforts to diversify the journal. Essentially, we're trying right now to develop an appropriate metric system to make sure that we're tracking relevant information to really better understand and quantify the diversity of our reviewers and the manuscripts that we're triaging and publishing as well. Also, we're aiming to help students break into the system as well as reviewers and actually do some of what Ella was talking about in order to train early career and student reviewers to learn what it means to become a reviewer in a journal and to have them mentored through that process so that they can contribute to science in this way as well. And sixth and finally, we are dedicated to open dialogue. So our goal is to facilitate discussion about gender and diversity in a transparent fashion. So we are very excited to engage in discussions on social media. And here I've listed our Twitter handle, so you can find us at TCN Journal for the journal. And my co-editor in this department, Dr. Robin Hilzebeck at the University of Texas, and myself at Dr. Rivera Mint. And to conclude, I just want to highlight that there are multiple pathways to advancing diversity inclusion, and we need to take a multi-pronged approach if we're really going to tackle this important and urgently needed challenge in the field to advance science and to move forward to better serve our stakeholders and our constituents. And as I see it, and my fellow editors at TCN, we believe that transparency and ongoing communication with our constituents and stakeholders is key. And I look forward to reporting back to you in our progress in the months and years to come. So here you see a slide on references for you to follow up on, and this will be included in the PDF. And I want to say thank you so much to everybody today for being part of this important discussion. And now I will hand it back to Brittany.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Monica, and thanks so much to all of our panelists today for their insightful and helpful presentations. Now we're going to open it up to questions and answers. So if you haven't sent in your question yet, please do so using the question function. For right now, our first question is for Raquel and Brooks. So how do you, as a society, evolve to be seen as a global or inclusive influence with the term American in the title of your society name? This is a challenge for my society as well.
Yeah, I can start off. So with the American Chemical Society, yes, that sometimes can be a bit of a hindrance as we're interacting with an increasing number of universities and student chapters internationally. So we've had very intentional efforts, both with student chapters and with professional chapters abroad. I think at this point, there are about 40 student chapters in countries all over the world, from Australia to Africa to who knows where else. But one of the ways that we try to encourage it is to really meet those that are interested where they are. So in some instances, there may be countries that do not approve of students interacting with the American Chemical Society. They prefer perhaps their local institution or organization be their primary kind of go-to organization when it comes to scientific engagement. So that's fine. But for countries that don't have those types of distinctions, we definitely encourage those chapters to form. We're offering things such as grants, student chapter grants for them to carry on outreach activities and things of that nature. And with the professional chapters, there are pilot programs currently in place where we're doing some studies to investigate what would be best in terms of pricing for membership fees and things of that nature. So I think one thing that has helped so far is the reputation of the American Chemical Society in terms of being a premier publication already, and that kind of helps with the helps drive interest to the organization. And then it's on our part to do what we can to make it as flexible and accommodating as we can in order for those that are interested to be better engaged.
So this is Brooks, thanks. Wow, that's a very difficult question for us, because when we talk about AGU, we say we're American is in our title and we're not American, and geophysics is in our title and we do a lot more than geophysics, and union is our title and we are not a labor union. So it's really all parts of that. We've for a long time been a very international society. In our publications now, about 2/3 of our papers, so about 1/3 are from North America, 1/3 from Europe, and 1/3 from Asia, and then others from and including Australia and Asia, and others from the Southern Hemisphere. In our membership is now only, I think, just hit about 50% non-US. And we've had a wide range of partnerships for a long time with other societies and meetings internationally. So our editorial pool is international and growing, and that's something we're recognizing given that our publications are essentially fully international. So we're talking of ourselves more as the AGU rather than the American Geophysical Union, because as I mentioned, all three of those words are not really representative or fully representative of what the society is today. But at the same time, we're very proud of the brand, and as was just mentioned, we're that has a large reputational effect also, but we hope a fully international reputation as well.
Great. Thanks, Raquel, and thanks, Brooks. Our next question is, we know that collecting demographic data is important to show impact, and but how do you effectively do this so that authors and reviewers don't worry about bias and that data being potentially used against them?
Brittany, is that question for me or Ella, or is it open? This is Monica.
Yeah, open to anyone.
Right. So I'll take a stab at that question. So I think that's a really valid question and concern, and I understand. And I want to note that in our conceptualization, certain questions about certain demographics would be voluntarily acquired, so we would not force anybody to answer anything that they didn't want to answer, and there is absolutely no punitive intent in any of the questions that we would ask once we start collecting these data. So this is purely to inform, to empirically inform our practice and the way we do our work and policy, but there's nothing at all punitive in anything that we're thinking about. And I want to highlight that this is really just to inform and help the process, and we would definitely be transparent in that process as we would continue. I hope that's helpful.
And this is Brooks. The one thing I would say from conversations that we've had across our community is I think the general sense is our community's been very happy that we've been able to address this in an aggregated way and explore this with actual data. So there may be a few folks that aren't contributing, but as I mentioned, the self-reporting of gender and age data is very high within our community, and explaining what we're using it for and how we're using it is very critical and has been well supported.
This is Ella as well. Yeah, I absolutely agree with Monica and Brooks, and the type of data that we want to collect would be voluntary, it would be self-reported, and we make sure that we are being transparent. I do think that with the recent sort of GDPR updates as well, that there is some things that need kind of smoothing out there as well, because we can't be keeping data that isn't for a sort of specific use, but the people that have been giving the data in the past have been doing it voluntarily, and it has been something that they are supportive of. So I think there are ways forward with it.
Great, thanks so much. Our next question is for Ella. Can you speak to how difficult it has been for journals to invite and engage stakeholder peer reviewers or editors who are outside of the academic community?
So the journal that I gave an example of, Research Involvement and Engagement, really takes sort of co-production and patient involvement at its heart. So the way it's set up is that we have patient editors and academic editors, and we recruit patient editors to, we recruit patient reviewers to the journal in a very similar way that academics might find some reviewers, not in terms of publication record, obviously, but through networks. So our patient editors have very wide patient networks, and we also have a wide editorial board that we can go to for reviewer recommendations and help there. We also collaborate with patient organisations or patient advocacy groups to work with them to see if any of their members would like to sign up as patient reviewers. So there's a couple of different things that we do. It's easier with a patient editor, I think, to be able to know who to approach for patient reviewers.
Great, thanks, Ella. So I want to wrap up Q&A for now. Thanks so much to our speakers again, and thank you to everyone for attending the webinar today. And a big thank you to Raquel, Brooks, Ella, and Monica for sharing their insights and various perspectives into diversity, inclusion, and peer review. A special thank you today to Technica Editorial Services for sponsoring today's webinar. And for those of you attending who are not currently a member of the Council of Science Editors, I encourage you to visit our website for a list of the benefits our members enjoy, all of which aim to help increase knowledge about aspects of scientific editing and publishing, and staying up to date on issues and trends in scientific editing and publishing. So after today's webinar, please don't forget to complete the evaluation to provide us with your input. And if we did not get to your question today, we will follow up via email. As well, those PDFs of the presentations today will be sent to you. So thanks so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you to our presenters, and everyone have a great rest of your peer review week.